The sound came first, a hollow metallic thud followed by the hiss of hydraulics as the breech slammed shut. Captain Michael "Iron Mike" Harrington felt the familiar vibration beneath his boots as the 120mm main gun of his M1A1 Abrams prepared to unleash hell. Time compressed. The world outside the commander's hatch narrowed to a tunnel of awareness. Target identified, T-72, 12 o'clock, 1,000 meters. The voice of Sergeant Taylor, his gunner, cut through the static on the intercom. Mike's eyes locked onto the thermal signature of the Iraqi Republican Guard tank through his commander's sight. The enemy vehicle sat partially concealed behind a small rise in the undulating Iraqi desert, its turrets slowly traversing, searching. Fire heat. Mike's voice betrayed none of the adrenaline surging through his system. This wasn't training anymore. The round they were about to fire contained high-explosive anti-tank munitions designed to penetrate armor and spread molten metal throughout the interior of an enemy vehicle. Inside that T-72 were men who would die in seconds. The Abrams rocked as the main gun fired, the concussion rattling Mike's teeth even through his CBC helmet. Through his sight, he watched the round impact the turret of the T-72. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a flash. The ammunition inside the enemy tank detonated, blowing the turret clean off the hull. Target destroyed. Mike's eyes widened as he saw a figure, a man, ejected from the turret hatch by the force of the explosion. The Iraqi tank commander was engulfed in flames, a human torch arcing through the desert air before crashing to the ground 60 feet away. Gunner Sabbat, second target right. No time for reflection. The lethal ballet continued. Taylor was already reacting, the turret traversing slightly as Specialist Rodriguez, the loader, slammed a depleted uranium round into the breach. Up! Fire! Another explosion, another enemy vehicle erupted in flames. The round had punched straight through the thinner side armor of the T-72 like it was made of aluminum. "Sir, we're in a minefield," called Private Henskog from the driver's compartment. Mike's mind processed this new information, even as his eyes identified a third target. Gunner Sabbat, third target, same bearing. Identified. Fire! A third explosion bloomed in the desert. 3 tanks destroyed in less than 10 seconds. Later, they would call it the most lopsided tank battle since World War II. But in this moment, Captain Michael Harrington had no conception of history being made. There was only the next target, the next threat, the mission. "Eagle 6 to all Eagle elements," he called into the radio. 8 T-72s at R-12. Green and white, are you with me? The familiar voices of his platoon leaders crackled in response. "Green is with you, Eagle 6. White is up, moving to support your 3 o'clock. All elements, advance through the minefield. Tanks lead, Bradley's follow in tracks. I say again, Bradley's stay in tank tracks." As the words left his mouth, Mike spotted the telltale signs of anti-personnel mines popping like deadly popcorn beneath the treads of his 67-ton war machine. The tank could withstand these smaller explosions. The Bradleys, with their lighter armor, could not. Below him, Henskog expertly maneuvered their Abrams, turning 45 degrees to the southeast without being told. The young driver knew exactly what was needed: to position their vehicle so all 9 tanks could engage with clear fields of fire, maximizing their overwhelming firepower. In that moment, Captain Michael "Iron Mike" Harrington knew with absolute certainty that all those endless training days in Germany had paid off. The men under his command were performing exactly as they had practiced, with a precision that would save American lives and end Iraqi ones. What none of them yet realized was that they had just engaged the elite Tawakalna division of the Iraqi Republican Guard. They were outnumbered more than 5 to 1, and they were about to achieve one of the most decisive victories in modern armored warfare. But that story began long before this desert battlefield. Long before Michael Harrington ever heard of a place called 73 Easting, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 1962. The red brick colonial on Maple Street looked like any other post-war American home. White trim, black shutters, a small but immaculately maintained front lawn. Inside, however, was a household shaped by war in ways invisible to neighbors. 6-year-old Michael Harrington sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of his bedroom, carefully arranging plastic army men into formations. The door creaked open, and his father's imposing frame filled the entryway. George Harrington still carried himself with the ramrod-straight posture of the sergeant he had once been. 20 years removed from Korea, he retained the bearing of a soldier. "Planning an offensive, General?" George asked with a hint of amusement. The North Koreans are in those hills, Michael replied, pointing to a mound of green pillows. We need to take the high ground. Something flickered across George's weathered face, pride mixed with a deeper, more complex emotion. He lowered himself to the floor beside his son with a grunt, his left leg extending awkwardly. The old wound never healed quite right. You've got your men too bunched up, George said, rearranging several of the plastic soldiers. When I was at Porkchop Hill, we learned that the hard way. Michael's eyes widened. His father rarely spoke about Korea. These fragments of memory were treasures, carefully collected and stored away. Tell me about the bar again, the boy urged. George's calloused hand unconsciously rubbed at his thigh where the shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. The Browning automatic rifle, he began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that suggested he'd recited these specifications countless times to himself. 20 pounds unloaded, 20-round detachable box magazine, effective range of about 500 yards. He paused, his gaze distant. The weight of it, that's what I remember most. Carrying that beast up those hills. But when the Chinese came in human waves, there was nothing better to have in your hands. That night, after his father had gone downstairs, Michael crept to the hall closet where he knew his father kept a wooden box on the top shelf. Standing on a chair, he retrieved it and carried it reverently back to his room. Inside were his father's medals, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and several others Michael couldn't identify. There were yellowing photographs of young men in uniform, their faces etched with a peculiar mixture of youth and prematurely aged eyes. And there was a battered leather-bound journal. The discovery of that box became the first turning point in Michael Harrington's life. As he carefully read through his father's journal in the following weeks, piecing together the fragmented accounts of battle, fear, brotherhood, and survival, something crystallized within him. The stories contained in those pages, stories of ordinary men doing extraordinary things under the most extreme circumstances, planted a seed that would grow into an unshakable calling. Michael's mother, Elizabeth, a history teacher at the local high school, noticed her son's growing fascination. Rather than discourage it, she channeled it. Weekend trips to Gettysburg became family traditions. Books about American military history appeared on his birthday and Christmas. By 12, Michael could recite the major movements of the Battle of the Bulge, explain the strategic significance of Midway, and argue passionately about whether Patton or Rommel was the superior tank commander. Knowledge without purpose is just trivia, Michael, Elizabeth would tell him. Understanding our history helps us shape our future. Those words would echo in his mind decades later as he made critical decisions on battlefields half a world away. West Point, 1980. The gray stone buildings of the United States Military Academy rose imposingly against the backdrop of the Hudson River. For the cadets of the class of 1984, the legendary institution represented both prison and opportunity, a crucible that would either forge them into officers or break them in the attempt. For Cadet Michael Harrington, the Academy's rigid structure proved an immediate challenge. The daily routine was relentless. Reveille at Aero 545, morning formation, breakfast, classes, athletics, evening study period, and taps at 2300. Every minute scheduled, every activity evaluated. Harrington, that is not how we make a bed at West Point. The tactical officer's voice boomed through the corridor of the barracks. I could bounce a quarter off my grandmother's saggy mattress with more success than on this disaster. Mike stood at attention, eyes fixed forward, as his freshly made bed was systematically destroyed by the upperclassmen. He would have to start again, knowing it would likely be destroyed again tomorrow. Yes, sir. And your brass looks like you polished it with a Hershey bar, Harrington. 5 demerits. Yes, sir. Later, his roommate Tom Wilkins found him furiously polishing his belt buckle to a mirror shine. You know they're just going to find something else tomorrow, Wilkins said, flopping onto his perfectly made bed. That's not the point, Mike replied without looking up. The point is not giving them legitimate reasons. Spoken like someone who's already racked up more demerits than anyone else in our class, Wilkins laughed. It was true. After his first semester, Mike had accumulated a record number of demerits, not for serious infractions, but for a steady stream of minor violations that reflected his struggle with the Academy's obsession with minutia. His tactical officer, Captain Raymond Blackwood, seemed particularly determined to break him. The confrontation came during Mike's sophomore year. During a leadership assessment, Blackwood had given him a failing grade. Your problem, Mr. Harrington, is that you question everything. Blackwood said during their review. An officer executes orders, he doesn't debate them. With respect, sir, Mike replied, standing rigidly at attention in Blackwood's office. I believe an officer should understand the why behind the orders. Blackwood's face darkened. Understanding and questioning are different things, cadet. Your record here suggests a fundamental problem with authority. My record in field exercises suggests otherwise, sir. It was a dangerous comment, bordering on insubordination. But it was also true. While Mike's barracks performance was mediocre at best, his tactical evaluations during summer training had been exemplary. The previous summer, attached to an infantry unit at Fort Carson, he had led his squad through a complex night operation at the newly established National Training Center, earning a written commendation from the battalion commander. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You think battlefield performance excuses barracks deficiencies? It's all connected, Harrington. Discipline is discipline. Yes, sir, Mike replied, but his tone conveyed his disagreement. That evening, Mike sat alone in the library, contemplating his future at the academy. He had come here with a clear purpose, to become an officer like those his father had served with, men who led from the front and understood both the mission and their men. The academy's approach seemed designed to produce something different, officers who followed the rules without question. A shadow fell across his textbook. Looking up, he found himself staring at Colonel James Monroe, his tactical officer from summer training. Harrington, Monroe said with a nod, I heard about your situation with Captain Blackwood. Mike stood. Sir, Monroe waved him back to his seat and settled into the chair opposite. Word gets around, I read his evaluation. Mike remained silent, unsure where this was going. I also read the recommendation letter from Lieutenant Colonel Grayson at Fort Carson. Quite a contrast. Yes, sir. Monroe studied him for a long moment. Tell me something, Harrington. Why do you want to be an officer? The question caught Mike off guard. Not what kind of officer he wanted to be, but why? He thought about his father's journal, about the stories of men following leaders they trusted into hellish conditions. To lead men in combat, sir, he answered simply, to bring them home again. Monroe nodded slowly. Not to have a career, not for the prestige? No, sir. And in your mind, how does a perfect uniform inspection relate to that goal? Mike hesitated, then decided on honesty. It doesn't, sir, not directly. Monroe leaned forward. Let me tell you something they don't teach explicitly here, Harrington. The academy isn't just training you for combat. They're training you for everything that surrounds combat. The monotony, the bureaucracy, the senseless rules that sometimes exist simply because they always have. He tapped the table for emphasis. Your ability to navigate that system, to excel within it while maintaining your principles, that's as much a test of your fitness for command as any tactical problem. The conversation marked a turning point. Mike didn't suddenly become the model cadet, but he developed a new perspective on the system he was navigating. The demerits decreased. His relationship with Captain Blackwood remained cool but professional. And when graduation approached, Mike found himself in the top quarter of his class, not spectacular, but respectable. His requested branch assignment was aviation. The romantic vision of flying scout helicopters, skimming treetops to gather intelligence like the legendary aerial scouts in Vietnam, had captured his imagination. Infantry was his second choice, armor his third. Life, however, had other plans. Fort Knox, Kentucky, 1984 and 1994, Second Lieutenant Michael Harrington stood in stunned silence as the flight surgeon delivered the news. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. The astigmatism in your left eye exceeds Army aviation standards. I'm going to have to disqualify you for flight school. The words hit like physical blows. For 4 years, Mike had dreamed of piloting a helicopter. He'd read everything about aerial reconnaissance, from Vietnam accounts to the latest doctrine. Now, with a single medical assessment, that future evaporated. There must be some mistake, he managed, his voice tight. I passed all the preliminary screenings at West Point. The flight surgeon's expression remained professionally sympathetic. Those were preliminary only. This is the full workup. The standards are strict for a reason, Lieutenant. Lives depend on a pilot's vision. That evening, Mike sat alone in the officers' quarters, a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels on the desk before him. His phone call to Human Resources Command had been brief and unsympathetic. Yes, Lieutenant Harrington, we have your file here. Since you're already at Fort Knox for Aviation BOLC, you'll be reassigning to Armor BOL effective tomorrow. Report to Building 1387 at 0732. But sir, my second choice was infantry. Shouldn't I be sent to Fort Benning? A tired sigh came through the receiver. Lieutenant, do you want to wait 3 months for the next infantry BOLC cycle to start, or do you want to continue your training now as an armor officer? The decision was made for him. Armor, tanks, not exactly what he'd envisioned when he graduated from West Point just weeks earlier. A knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Opening it, he found a weathered captain with salt and pepper hair and a cavalry Stetson tucked under his arm. Harrington? Joe McKinnon, I'm one of your new instructors. Mike straightened. Sir, Save it, McKinnon said, stepping past him into the room. His eyes fell on the bottle of whiskey. Good choice of medicine, but a poor choice of dosage. You're drinking alone, which means you're either celebrating or mourning. Since I just saw your name added to my roster, I'm guessing it's the latter. Mike closed the door. Darn. News travels fast. Small post, smaller community. McKinnon settled into the room's only chair. So, aviation dream shot down? Yes, sir. And now you're stuck with tanks instead of helicopters. That about sums it up, sir. McKinnon nodded slowly. Let me tell you a story, Lieutenant. Vietnam, 1972. I was an infantry platoon leader. We got pinned down by a heavy machine gun in a tree line, called for air support. Beautiful Cobra gunship shows up, makes one pass, then gets shot to hell by a 23mm anti-aircraft gun none of us knew was there. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. Pilot managed to auto-rotate down to a field about 300 meters from us. Crew survived the crash, but were stuck there, taking fire. Then we hear the most beautiful sound in the world, the roar of an M48 Patton tank from our supporting armor unit. That tank rolled straight into that field, positioned itself between the downed helicopter and the enemy, and proceeded to blow that tree line to splinters. McKinnon refocused on Mike. That tank crew saved those pilots, saved my men too. They couldn't fly, but by God, they could fight. He stood. Report to Building 1387 tomorrow, Lieutenant. With an open mind, you might discover that tracks suit you better than rotors ever would have. The Armor Basic Officer Leadership course transformed Mike's perspective. The first time he climbed inside an M60A3 tank, something clicked. The cramped interior, filled with the smell of metal, oil, and hydraulic fluid, felt strangely like home. The massive 105mm main gun, the layered armor designed to withstand tremendous punishment, the raw mechanical power of the turbine engine, all of it spoke to something primal in him. A tank isn't just a vehicle, Instructor Sergeant First Class Rivera told the class of new lieutenants. It's a system, 4 men working in perfect coordination to deliver the most devastating direct fire weapon in the U.S. Army's arsenal. One weak link in that crew and the whole system fails. Mike absorbed everything, the technical specifications, the tactical doctrine, the maintenance procedures. He learned how to operate in each of the 4 crew positions: driver, loader, gunner, and commander. He discovered the unique language of armored warfare, with its talk of hold-down positions, reverse slope defenses, and herringbone formations. Most importantly, he learned about the brotherhood of tankers, men whose lives depended on each other in the most literal sense, sealed together in a metal box that could become a death trap in seconds if anyone failed in their duty. The defining moment came during their final field exercise. Mike was serving as a gunner in a crew commanded by another lieutenant. They were engaging simulated enemy targets on a range when their tank's hydraulic system failed, leaving the turret inoperable. Standard procedure called for the crew to evacuate and wait for maintenance. To hell with that, the tank commander said. Harrington, remember that manual override drill we practiced? Yes, sir, but we've never done it under actual firing conditions. First time for everything. Saddle up. For the next hour, they engaged targets using the hand crank to traverse the turret, a physically exhausting process that required perfect coordination between commander and gunner. When they finally rolled back to the assembly area, their scores were still among the highest in the class despite the mechanical failure. Captain McKinnon was waiting for them. That, he said with a rare smile, is what makes tankers different. Adapt, overcome, destroy. Remember that, gentlemen. Mike did remember. Years later in the deserts of Iraq, those words would come back to him at a critical moment. Fort Hood, Texas, 1985. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the vast motor pool of the 2nd Armored Division. First Lieutenant Michael Harrington, now 6 months into his first real assignment, walked along a line of M1 Abrams tanks, clipboard in hand, conducting pre-operation inspections. "Maintenance issues on Tank 6-6?" he asked Staff Sergeant Martinez, his platoon sergeant. Martinez gestured toward the massive vehicle where a specialist was elbow-deep in the engine compartment. "Fuel filter issue, sir. Peters is handling it. Should be good to go in 20. Mike nodded and made a note. His position as support platoon leader wasn't what he'd envisioned. He'd hoped for a tank platoon right away, but he'd come to appreciate the role. Responsible for all the logistics, ammunition, and maintenance for the company, he'd gained invaluable knowledge about what made an armored unit function behind the scenes. "Lieutenant Harrington." Mike turned to see the imposing figure of Lieutenant Colonel Billy Morgan striding toward him. The battalion commander was an intimidating presence, 6'4" with broad shoulders and a booming voice that could carry across a tank range without a megaphone. More significant than his physical presence, however, was his background. Morgan had risen from poverty in Ferraro, Mississippi, enlisted at 17, and earned a battlefield commission in Vietnam. He was that rare combination of technical expert, tactical genius, and natural leader that younger officers aspired to become. "Good morning, sir," Mike said, straightening. "Walk with me, Harrington." Morgan didn't wait for a response, already moving between the rows of tanks. "Yes, sir." "I've been watching your platoon's performance metrics," Morgan said without preamble. "Fuel efficiency up 12%. Maintenance downtime reduced by nearly a third. Ammunition expenditure exactly on target despite increased live fire exercises." "Thank you, sir." Morgan stopped and fixed Mike with an appraising look. "That's not the profile of a support platoon leader, Harrington. That's the profile of a company XO or a future battalion S4. Mike wasn't sure how to respond. Was this praise or criticism? "My tank's thermal sight is malfunctioning," Morgan continued, changing subjects abruptly. "Maintenance says they're back-ordered on thermal receiver units, 3-week wait minimum." "I see, sir." Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you? Because I have a feeling you might have a solution that official channels don't." The moment of truth. Mike knew exactly what Morgan was referring to. His platoon had indeed acquired, through unofficial channels that skirted several regulations, an extra thermal receiver unit. It was intended as an emergency backup for the company's tanks. "I might be able to help with that, sir," Mike said carefully. "If you could bring your tank around to Bay 12 in about an hour." Morgan's stern expression cracked into a slight smile. "I knew it. You supply officers are all the same, official scroungers and unofficial magicians." He clapped Mike on the shoulder. "Bay 12 in 1 hour." Later that day, with the battalion commander's tank fully operational again, Mike found himself unexpectedly summoned to the tank range. When he arrived, Morgan was standing beside his Abrams. "Climb aboard, Lieutenant," Morgan called. "You've never driven an M1 in combat conditions, have you?" "No, sir, only in training." Morgan gestured to the commander's hatch. "Today that changes. We're qualifying on Table 8. You're taking my tank downrange." Mike's confusion must have shown on his face. "Don't worry," Morgan added. "You've got Sergeant Peterson as your gunner. He could hit a beer can at 2,000 meters. Just don't embarrass me." What followed was the most intense 2 hours of Mike's military career to that point. The qualification course required engaging multiple targets at various ranges while moving, in different postures, and under simulated chemical attack conditions. It tested every aspect of a tank crew's abilities. To Mike's surprise, they scored distinguished, the highest possible rating. When they returned to the assembly area, the other company commanders gathered around, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "Remind me never to let my support platoon leader touch my tank," one of them said to Morgan with a laugh. Morgan's response was deadpan. "Remind me to always have officers who can actually fight, regardless of their current position." That evening, Mike sat in his small apartment off post, still processing the day's events. A photograph of his father in Korea sat on the desk beside a stack of military journals and technical manuals. 5 years, he thought. 5 years and I'm out. I'll have served honorably, learned valuable skills, and can transition to civilian life with good prospects. He'd already begun researching management positions at defense contractors, had even registered with a headhunting firm specializing in placing former military officers. The plan was clear, reasonable, and entirely in keeping with what many of his West Point classmates intended. So why did it feel so hollow? The following Friday found Mike at the Officers Club for the traditional Right Arm Night, an informal gathering where officers and their senior NCOs socialized over drinks. He was nursing a beer at the bar when Staff Sergeant Martinez and Sergeant First Class Thompson, the company's master gunner, slid onto adjacent stools. "You're looking philosophical, LT," Thompson observed, signaling the bartender. Mike shrugged, "Just thinking about the future." "Yeah? What about it?" "Whether it includes the Army past my initial commitment." Martinez and Thompson exchanged glances. "You're thinking of getting out?" Martinez asked, surprise evident in his voice. "It's the normal career path," Mike replied. "Do my 5, take the experience to the private sector." Thompson snorted. "Normal for who? The guys who came here to punch their ticket? Get a line on their resume?" "That's not—" Mike began, but Thompson cut him off. "Let me tell you something, sir. There are 2 kinds of officers we see come through. Those who are here to serve themselves and those who are here to serve. The first kind, they do their time, check their boxes, and move on. The second kind," he gestured around the room, "they build something that lasts." "What Thompson is trying to say, sir," Martinez interjected, "is that you're not the first kind. At least, we didn't think you were." The simple statement hit Mike harder than any eloquent argument could have. These men, professional soldiers with years more experience than he had seen something in him that he was now questioning in himself. "I've got a plane ticket to Chicago next month," Mike said quietly. "Interview with Raytheon." Thompson finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Well, that's your call, sir. But I'll tell you this, there aren't many lieutenants who could take an M1 downrange with no prior experience and score distinguished, even fewer who've earned the respect of every NCO in the company within 6 months. That kind of officer, the Army needs more of those, not fewer." The conversation shifted to other topics, but those words lingered. That night, Mike returned to his apartment and stared at the plane ticket on his desk for a long while. Then he picked up the phone and dialed his girlfriend, Katie's number. "Hey," he said when she answered, "how would you feel about me staying in past my initial commitment?" Her answer, immediate and supportive, settled something in him. The plane ticket went into a drawer, never to be used. The headhunter received a polite email withdrawing his registration, and First Lieutenant Michael Harrington recommitted himself to a path that would eventually lead him to command tanks in combat, a destiny that, in retrospect, seemed almost inevitable. Germany, 1990. Captain Michael Harrington stepped off the military transport at Ramstein Air Base into a gray drizzle. After a brief processing period, he found himself riding in a military van toward the headquarters of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, his new assignment. The promotion to captain had come with orders to the prestigious unit, one of the front-line forces facing the Warsaw Pact across the Fulda Gap. Although the Cold War was showing signs of thawing, the Berlin Wall had fallen just months earlier, the U.S. Army in Europe maintained its combat edge. No one was certain how the rapid changes in Eastern Europe would play out. Mike had been assigned as the regimental plans officer, a staff position that would prepare him for eventual company command. It wasn't the immediate command position he'd hoped for, but it offered valuable experience in higher-level operations planning. 3 weeks into his new assignment, however, fate intervened. The regimental commander, Colonel Marcus Reynolds, summoned Mike to his office unexpectedly. "Harrington, how are those plans for the regimental maneuver exercise coming along?" Reynolds asked without looking up from the papers on his desk. "On schedule, sir. We should have the OPORD ready for review by Friday." "Good. Put them on Major Henderson's desk before you leave today." Mike blinked in confusion. "Sir?" Reynolds finally looked up. "I'm reassigning you, Captain. Effective immediately, you're taking command of Eagle Troop." Mike struggled to hide his surprise. Eagle Troop was one of the regiment's 9 cavalry troops, company-sized units equipped with M1 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles. Command of such a unit was a plum assignment, usually reserved for captains with more time and grade than Mike had. "Sir, I'm honored, but isn't Captain Lowell in command of Eagle Troop?" Reynolds' expression hardened. "Not anymore. Eagle Troop failed their gunnery qualification at Grafenwehr last week." Dismally. "I need someone who can turn them around before we deploy to Hohenfels next month." The colonel stood and walked to a map of Germany on his wall. "This regiment has a proud history, Harrington. We were the first American forces to enter Germany in 1944, first across the Danube. We faced the Soviet 8th Guards Army across the border. If the balloon goes up, we're the screening force for the entire 7th Corps. I cannot have a substandard unit in this regiment." He turned back to Mike. "Your reputation from Fort Hood preceded you. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan speaks very highly of your tactical abilities and leadership. I need both right now in Eagle Troop. My driver is waiting outside to take you to Grafenwehr. You'll meet the troop there and begin your change of command inventory immediately. Just like that, Mike found himself propelled into his first command, not in the orderly, planned fashion he'd expected, but in the midst of a crisis that needed immediate resolution. The 3-hour drive to the training area gave him time to think. Eagle Troop's failure at gunnery indicated serious problems, either with the equipment, the training, or the leadership. Possibly all three. He would need to diagnose the issues quickly and implement solutions even faster. When he arrived at the Grafenwehr training area, he found a unit in disarray. The troops' vehicles were lined up in the assembly area, but maintenance standards were visibly subpar. Soldiers loitered without clear purpose. The general atmosphere was one of defeated resignation. First Sergeant Walter Higgins met him with a salute that somehow managed to be simultaneously crisp and resentful. "Welcome to Eagle Troop, sir," Higgins said, his tone neutral but his eyes evaluating. "Captain Lowell is clearing his gear from the command track." "Thank you, First Sergeant. I'd like to meet with all the platoon leaders and platoon sergeants in 30 minutes. "Yes, sir." Higgins hesitated. "Sir, if I might ask, what did Colonel Reynolds tell you about our situation?" "That you failed gunnery qualification. He didn't go into details." Higgins nodded. "With respect, sir, there were extenuating circumstances. Maintenance issues, parts shortages. The men did their best with what they had." Mike studied the senior NCO carefully. First Sergeant Higgins was either making excuses or identifying legitimate problems that needed addressing. Either way, his attitude would be critical to turning the unit around. "I understand, First Sergeant. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to fix problems. Let's start with that meeting." The platoon leaders turned out to be a mixed group. First Lieutenant Tim Gauthier, leading 1st Platoon, impressed Mike immediately. Sharp, articulate, with a clear grasp of both tactical principles and the technical aspects of his vehicles. 2nd Platoon's leader, 1st Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, seemed competent but somewhat beaten down by recent events. 3rd Platoon was led by a brand new 2nd Lieutenant fresh from the basic course who looked thoroughly overwhelmed. What struck Mike most, however, was the obvious talent among the NCOs. Platoon sergeants who clearly knew their business. Tank commanders with years of experience. The raw material was there for an excellent unit. After the initial meeting, Mike walked the line of vehicles with Lieutenant Gauthier, inspecting each tank and Bradley. "Sir, the main issue wasn't personnel," Gauthier explained quietly as they moved between vehicles. "It was maintenance and training time. First Sergeant Higgins runs old school. He believes in garrison standards above all else. Vehicles get cleaned for inspection rather than maintained for operation. Training gets canceled for barracks details." "And Captain Lowell?" Gauthier chose his words carefully. "A good officer in many ways, sir, but he and the First Sergeant were aligned in their priorities." Mike nodded, understanding the diplomatic phrasing. The former commander had allowed the First Sergeant to set priorities that emphasized appearance over combat readiness. A common enough problem in peacetime units. That evening, Mike called the troop together. Standing on the lowered ramp of a Bradley, he addressed the assembled soldiers. "I'm Captain Michael Harrington. As of today, I command Eagle Troop. I've spent the day looking at your vehicles, reviewing your gunnery scores, and talking with your leaders. Here's what I've concluded." He paused, scanning the faces looking up at him. "You're better than your performance suggests. Much better. The problem isn't a lack of talent or potential. It's a lack of focus on the right priorities." Several soldiers exchanged glances. This wasn't the ass-chewing they'd expected. "Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a new training schedule. Maintenance comes first. Every vehicle will be fully mission-capable within 5 days. Gunnery skills training will occupy 6 hours daily. PT will be conducted to standard, but not beyond. Barracks inspections will occur, but won't interfere with essential training." He made eye contact with First Sergeant Higgins. "First Sergeant, I need to see you in the command track immediately after this formation. Platoon leaders, I'll meet with you at 2100 hours to review the new training plan. Platoon sergeants, stand by to accompany the First Sergeant." The message was clear. Changes were coming, and they started at the top. The meeting with First Sergeant Higgins was direct and uncomfortable. "First Sergeant, I respect your experience and your service," Mike began once they were alone in the cramped interior of the command track. "But I need to be clear about my priorities. This troop exists for one purpose: to close with and destroy the enemy in ground combat. Everything we do must support that purpose." Higgins sat stiffly. "Yes, sir. The state of this unit tells me that hasn't been the case. I'm not interested in blame. I'm interested in solutions. Can you adjust your leadership style to emphasize combat readiness over garrison appearance? The question hung in the air between them. After a long moment, Higgins responded, "Sir, I've been doing this job one way for 16 years. It's the way I was trained. It's the way the Army has always worked." Mike nodded. "I understand that, but I'm asking if you can adapt. Because if you can't, I'll find you another position where your skills can be better utilized." The bluntness of the statement clearly caught Higgins off guard. "Are you threatening to relieve me, sir?" "No, First Sergeant. I'm being direct about my expectations and the consequences of not meeting them. The choice is yours." 2 weeks later, First Sergeant Higgins requested transfer to another unit. He was replaced by First Sergeant David Walker, a combat veteran with extensive experience in armored units. The change in leadership style was immediate and dramatic. Under the new training regimen, Eagle Troop transformed. Maintenance standards improved rapidly. Gunnery scores climbed. The soldiers, sensing the shift in priorities, responded with increasing enthusiasm. They were being treated like warriors again, not garrison troops. The culmination came at the Combined Arms Maneuver Training Center exercise in July. Eagle Troop, facing a simulated Soviet motorized rifle battalion, executed a textbook delay operation followed by a devastating counterattack. They destroyed 63 enemy vehicles while losing only 2 Bradleys, a result the observers called the Big Kibosh for how thoroughly they had demolished the opposition. Colonel Reynolds personally observed the after-action review. "Impressive turnaround, Harrington," he said as they walked back to the vehicles afterward. "From worst to first in under 3 months." "Thank you, sir. The potential was always there. They just needed the right focus." "We'll keep that focus sharp. The world's changing fast, and we may need combat-ready units sooner than anyone expects." Reynolds' words proved prophetic. Just 3 weeks later, on August 2nd, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. As the news spread through the regiment, Mike called his platoon leaders together on a basketball court where they'd been planning a training exercise. "Gentlemen, you've all heard the news," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "I want you to understand something clearly. We are going to deploy. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but soon. And when we do, we're going to war." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Sir, with respect, this could be another Panama or Grenada situation. Quick in and out by Special Operations Forces." Mike shook his head. "Saddam has the 4th largest army in the world. He's got Soviet equipment, chemical weapons, and combat experience from the Iran-Iraq War. This isn't Panama." He crouched down and drew a rough map in the dust of the court. "We need to max out our training from this point forward, because the next operations order I give you will likely be in the desert sands of Saudi Arabia." As the men dispersed, Lieutenant Gautier remained behind. "You really believe we're going, sir?" he asked quietly. Mike nodded. "I do, and we need to be ready." "The men are ready, sir," Gautier replied with confidence. "Eagle Troop won't let you down." In that moment, looking at the determined young officer before him, Captain Michael Harrington felt a surge of pride mixed with solemn responsibility. These men, his men, were prepared to follow him into combat, to risk their lives executing his orders. It was the ultimate trust, and he was determined to prove worthy of it. Little did any of them know that in just 6 months, they would be engaged in one of the most lopsided tank battles in modern military history, a battle that would eventually be studied in war colleges around the world, a battle that would come to define Michael "Iron Mike" Harrington's military legacy. But first, they had to get there, and the road to 73 Easting would be anything but smooth. Saudi Arabia, December 1990. The rising sun cast long shadows across the vast desert expanse of the staging area. Row upon row of armored vehicles stretched to the horizon, their desert tan paint absorbing the early morning light. Captain Michael "Iron Mike" Harrington stood atop his M1A1 Abrams, surveying Eagle Troop's position in the massive formation. "How's she running, Sergeant Taylor?" Mike called down to his gunner, who was conducting pre-operation checks on the tank's fire control system. "Like a dream, sir," Taylor replied, his face illuminated by the glow of the computer display. "Best I've ever seen her." Mike nodded with satisfaction. The painstaking preparation of the previous weeks was paying off. When the deployment orders had finally come in November, Eagle Troop had been ready. Their vehicles had received comprehensive overhauls, engines tuned to desert specifications, air filters upgraded to handle the fine sand, specialized lubricants for the extreme temperature variations. Every tank and Bradley in the troop had been stripped down, inspected, repaired, and reassembled with meticulous care. Captain Harrington! Mike turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, the squadron commander, approaching on foot. He climbed down from the turret and saluted. "Sir, walk with me," Wallace said, gesturing away from the vehicles. They moved between the rows of tanks, the morning stillness broken only by the distant sound of generators and the occasional shout of soldiers preparing for the day's training. 7th Corps is arriving, Wallace said without preamble. The Big Red One, 3rd Armored Division, 1st Cavalry. Over 1,500 more tanks joining us in the next month. That's good news, sir. Wallace nodded. It means the mission is changing. This won't be just a defense of Saudi Arabia anymore. We're going on offense. He stopped and faced Mike directly. The regiment will serve as the Corps' offensive covering force. That means we'll be out front, making contact with the Republican Guard, fixing their positions, and enabling the heavy divisions to maneuver. Eagle Troop will be part of that spearhead. The responsibility settled on Mike's shoulders like a physical weight. Being the tip of the spear meant his men would likely see combat first. "We'll be ready, sir." Wallace studied him for a moment. "I know you will. That's why I've positioned Eagle Troop on the southern flank of our advance. I need my strongest unit covering that sector." As Wallace walked away, Mike took a moment to absorb the implications. His troop, once the regiment's problem child, was now considered its strongest. The transformation they had achieved was remarkable, but the real test still lay ahead. Returning to his tank, he found his platoon leaders waiting for him. "Training change," Mike announced. "We're shifting focus to offensive operations. I want battle drills for hasty attacks, movements to contact, and breach operations. Lieutenant Gautier, have your scouts prepare for extended reconnaissance missions. We'll be the eyes and ears of the squadron when we move out." "Any timeline for the offensive, sir?" Rodriguez asked. "Nothing definite, but the pieces are moving into place." Mike looked each of them in the eye. "Whatever happens, we'll be ready." The remainder of December and early January saw Eagle Troop engage in increasingly complex training exercises. The desert environment posed unique challenges. Daytime temperatures soared to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while nighttime temperatures plummeted to near freezing. The fine sand infiltrated everything: weapons, electronics, food. Water discipline became paramount. Each soldier learned to survive on minimal rations, carefully preserved. Mike instituted what the men called the Big Kibosh training cycle, an intensive regimen based on their successful CMTC exercise in Germany. Each tank crew and Bradley section rotated through specialized drills, target acquisition in desert conditions, engagement of moving targets while on the move, breach operations through obstacles, and nighttime navigation without GPS assistance. The night operations proved particularly challenging. The featureless desert terrain made traditional land navigation nearly impossible. Mike adapted by having his crews learn to navigate by stars, just as ancient seafarers had done. Each vehicle commander became proficient with celestial navigation as a backup to their electronic systems. "If GPS fails, we still fight," Mike told his platoon leaders during an evening briefing. "Technology is a tool, not a crutch." The culmination of their training was a full troop exercise against a simulated Republican Guard battalion. Wallace and Colonel Reynolds observed as Eagle Troop executed a complex night attack, maneuvering through a simulated minefield to strike the enemy's flank. The after-action review was brief but gratifying. "Textbook execution," Reynolds commented. "If the real Republican Guard performs as poorly as our offer, this will be a short war." Mike wasn't so sure. Intelligence briefings had painted a sobering picture of their likely adversaries. The Republican Guard divisions, particularly the Tawakalna and Medina, were equipped with Soviet T-72 tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, and extensive artillery. They had combat experience from the Iran-Iraq War and were considered elite forces within the Iraqi military. "Don't underestimate them, sir," Mike said during a staff meeting. "These aren't the same Iraqi units that Kuwait faced. The Republican Guard is Saddam's best." The observation earned him a thoughtful nod from Reynolds. "Point taken, Captain. Keep that healthy respect for the enemy's capabilities. It'll keep your men alive." As January progressed, the massive coalition buildup continued. The Saudi desert became home to the largest concentration of military power since World War II. Eagle Troop soldiers watched with a mixture of awe and growing confidence as endless convoys of tanks, artillery, and support vehicles arrived daily. Mike used the opportunity to conduct joint training with coalition forces. Eagle Troop ran combined exercises with British Challenger tanks, French AMX-30s, and Egyptian M60s. The experience proved invaluable, allowing them to practice coordination procedures and understand the capabilities of their allies. During one such exercise, Mike met Captain Mohammed Al-Fahd, a Saudi armor officer serving as liaison to the regiment. The Saudi officer impressed him with his professionalism and knowledge of desert warfare. "Your men move well in the sand," Al-Fahd commented as they observed a combined maneuver. "Many Western units struggle with terrain like this." "We've been training hard," Mike replied, "but we still have much to learn about fighting in this environment." Al-Fahd nodded. "The desert forgives no mistakes. It can be as deadly an enemy as any human adversary." The Saudi officer became a valuable resource, sharing insights on local conditions and terrain features that wouldn't be apparent to someone unfamiliar with the region. He helped Mike's platoon leaders understand the impact of the Shamal winds, the treacherous soft sand areas that could bog down heavy vehicles, and the techniques for finding water sources in emergency situations. In late January, a significant sandstorm swept through their position, reducing visibility to near zero and coating everything with a fine layer of abrasive dust. The storm provided a harsh but effective final exam for their desert adaptation training. While many units struggled with maintenance problems afterward, Eagle Troop's vehicles remained at near-perfect operational readiness. The meticulous preparation procedures Mike had instituted, extra sealing on engine components, modified air filtration, and rigorous post-storm maintenance protocols, paid dividends. Colonel Reynolds noted the achievement during his inspection tour. "Not a single vehicle down," he remarked. "That's impressive work, Harrington." "Thank you, sir. The credit goes to the men. They've embraced the maintenance culture." Reynolds nodded. "Well, they'll need that discipline soon. G-Day is approaching." G-Day, the ground offensive, had been the subject of much speculation among the troops. Now it appeared the waiting was nearly over. As Reynolds walked away, Mike felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The sensation he had experienced before every major training and exercise, amplified by the knowledge that this would be the real thing. Not simulators, not laser engagement systems, but live ammunition and actual enemy forces. That evening, as he reviewed his maps in the command tent, Mike was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Al-Fahd. The Saudi officer carried a canvas bag, which he placed on the map table. "A gift, Captain Harrington," he said, "from my unit to yours." Inside the bag were small cloth packets. Al-Fahd opened one to reveal a mixture of dried dates, nuts, and what appeared to be some form of preserved meat. "Desert rations," he explained. "Better than your MREs, I assure you. High energy, long-lasting. Our tribal fighters have used these for centuries." "Thank you," Mike said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I'll distribute them to my men." Al-Fahd's expression grew serious. "There is something else you should know. Our border patrols captured an Iraqi vehicle yesterday, an MTLB personnel carrier." Mike's interest sharpened immediately. The MTLB was a Soviet-designed armored transport used extensively by Iraqi forces. "Where?" "Near the tri-border air area, about 60 kilometers northeast of here. The vehicle markings identified it as belonging to the Tawakalna division of the Republican Guard." The information sent a jolt through Mike. Intelligence had previously placed the Tawakalna much further north. "Were there prisoners?" Al-Fahd nodded. "3. They were conducting reconnaissance of our positions. Their equipment was new: night vision devices, secure communications, detailed maps of the border region." "Tawakalna," Mike mused, recalling the intelligence briefings. "They're considered Saddam's elite. T-72M1 tanks, BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles, extensive artillery support." "Yes, and now they are moving south into your sector." The news confirmed what Mike had suspected. Eagle Troop would likely face the best that Saddam had to offer. He thanked Al-Fahd for the information and spent the rest of the evening updating his tactical assessments and battle plans. Later that night, alone in his cot, Mike reviewed a letter he'd received from Katie earlier in the week. She wrote of normal life back home, friends getting married, a new restaurant opening near their apartment in Germany, plans for when he returned. The mundane details of civilian existence seemed almost surreal compared to his current reality. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the pocket of his uniform blouse, next to a small photograph of his parents. Then he tried to sleep, knowing that each hour of rest was precious currency he might soon be unable to afford. February 23, 1991. The ground offensive had begun. After 38 days of around-the-clock air bombardment, the coalition forces were finally moving. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment, serving as the offensive covering force for 7 Corps, advanced into Iraq with a mission to locate and fix Republican Guard forces for destruction by the heavy divisions following behind them. Eagle Troop moved as part of Ghost Squadron, the southern element of the regimental advance. The first day passed without significant contact. Occasional sightings of retreating Iraqi regular army units, but nothing resembling organized resistance. These demoralized troops surrendered in large numbers, often without firing a shot. "This isn't the Republican Guard," Mike commented to Lieutenant Gautier as they processed yet another group of Iraqi prisoners. "These men haven't been properly supplied in weeks. Look at their equipment. Half of it doesn't function." Gautier nodded. "The air campaign hit them hard, but the Guard units have been sheltered, dug in. They'll be different." The prediction proved accurate. On February 25th, the regiment began encountering more determined resistance. Forward scout elements reported dug-in infantry positions supported by artillery. These forces appeared to be screening for larger formations further east. That evening, Mike attended a squadron briefing where intelligence officers shared the latest assessment. "We believe elements of the Tawakalna Division are establishing defensive positions along this ridgeline," the S2 officer explained, indicating a line on the map. "Their mission appears to be delaying our advance to allow the main Republican Guard formations to reposition further east." Lieutenant Colonel Wallace outlined the next day's mission. "We'll continue eastward advance to locate and fix these forces. Ghost and Killer squadrons will lead, with Eagle Squadron in reserve. I want aggressive but controlled movement. This isn't the Iraqi regular army anymore. These guys will fight." Mike studied the map, noting the terrain features and suspected enemy positions. The advance would take them through increasingly complex terrain, low ridgelines, and wadis that offered defensive advantages to the Iraqis. Returning to his troop, he gathered his platoon leaders for a detailed brief. "Tomorrow we push to phase line Tangerine, then possibly beyond to phase line Grape," he explained, referencing the control measures established for the operation. "Intelligence indicates Tawakalna Division elements in our sector. These are T-72 tanks with 125mm guns, capable of engaging us at ranges up to 2,000 meters." He pointed to specific terrain features on the map. "First platoon will lead with our scouts, maintaining a 500-meter interval. Second platoon will follow in wedge formation. Third platoon will provide our southern security. I'll position the troop command element between first and second." The briefing continued with communications procedures, actions on contact, and casualty evacuation plans. Throughout, Mike emphasized the need for tactical patience. "We're the eyes and ears of the division. Our job is to find the enemy, fix their position, and call in the heavies to finish them. Don't get drawn into an extended firefight if you can avoid it." As the platoon leaders departed to brief their units, Lieutenant Rodriguez lingered. "Sir, the men are asking, what are we really expecting tomorrow?" Mike considered the question carefully. The young officer was seeking guidance on how to prepare his soldiers mentally. "Tell them to expect everything," Mike finally replied. "The Iraqis might surrender immediately. They might fight like demons. Most likely something in between. What matters is that we're ready for whatever comes." Rodriguez nodded, satisfied with the honest assessment. That night, a heavy rain fell, unusual for the desert in February. The downpour transformed the dusty ground into mud, complicating movement for the wheeled support vehicles. For the tanks and Bradleys, however, the wet conditions actually improved traction in the soft sand areas. Mike tried to sleep in the cramped confines of his tank, using the ammunition storage rack as an improvised bunk. The rhythmic drumming of rain on the metal hull created an almost hypnotic backdrop, but sleep proved elusive. His mind kept cycling through contingencies, tactical options, potential problems. Around 200 hours, Sergeant Taylor shook him awake. "Sir, Frago from regiment." Mike blinked away fatigue and accepted the radio handset. A fragmentary order, an update to their mission, was being transmitted. "Eagle 6, this is Ghost 6. Acknowledge receipt of Frago 23. Ghost 6, Eagle 6, receiving." The transmission outlined a significant change to their mission. Instead of continuing to phase line Grape, they were to halt at Tangerine and establish defensive positions. The heavy divisions needed more time to move their logistics forward. Mike acknowledged the order and handed the handset back to Taylor. "Try to get some rest," he told his gunner. "Tomorrow may be a long day." "Roger that, sir," Taylor replied. though both men knew that meaningful sleep was unlikely at this point. February 26th dawned with a strange meteorological progression. The overnight rain had created a dense ground fog that limited visibility to less than 100 meters. As the sun rose, the fog began to lift, only to be replaced by increasing winds that stirred up the sand into a developing sandstorm. Eagle Troop moved out at 0630, advancing eastward in their assigned formation. The weather conditions made navigation challenging. Their GPS systems, still a relatively new technology, functioned intermittently in the adverse conditions. Mike had his platoons rely on compass bearings and dead reckoning, periodically verifying their position against known terrain features. By mid-morning, they had reached phase line Tangerine without significant contact. The scheduled halt to establish defensive positions was met with mixed reactions among the troops. After days of advance, the order to dig in felt like a loss of momentum. Mike found himself sharing that frustration as he watched engineers arrive with bulldozers to create protective berms for the tanks. "We're digging in a 70-ton killing machine," he muttered to Lieutenant Gautier as they observed the operation. "This isn't what we trained for." Gautier nodded in agreement. "The men don't understand it either. We've got the Iraqis on the run. Why are we stopping?" The answer came that afternoon when Lieutenant Colonel Wallace arrived at their position for an inspection. Mike took the opportunity to voice his concerns. "Sir, with respect, my troops are questioning the halt order. We've got momentum. The enemy is disorganized. This seems like the time to press the advantage." Wallace's expression remained neutral, but his response was enlightening. "It's not my call, Mike. Corps wants the divisions closed up before we make major contact with the Republican Guard. They were worried about our flanks, about units getting isolated." He gestured toward the east. "Intelligence indicates the main body of the Tawakalna is still out there, probably within the next 30 kilometers. When we hit them, it needs to be with overwhelming force." Mike understood the logic, even if he didn't agree with it. Strategic considerations were outweighing tactical opportunities. Still, it felt wrong to surrender the initiative. As Wallace prepared to depart, Mike made one last attempt. "Sir, permission to conduct aggressive patrolling at least. We need better intelligence on what's in front of us." Wallace considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Approved. But don't get decisively engaged. Find them, report them, let the heavies handle them." The rest of the day was spent improving their defensive positions and conducting maintenance. The sandstorm intensified, reducing visibility and coating everything with a fine layer of dust. Communications became difficult as the airborne sand affected radio performance. Around 1700 hours, as the light began to fade, the unexpected occurred. A transmission from regimental headquarters ordered all units to prepare to resume the advance. They were to move to phase line Grape, approximately 10 kilometers further east. Mike gathered his platoon leaders quickly. "Change of plans. We move in 30 minutes. Same formation as this morning. Weather conditions are deteriorating, so keep tight intervals and maintain communication." "What prompted the change, sir?" Rodriguez asked. "Not sure," Mike replied honestly. "But we're moving. Get your platoons ready." As the troop prepared to move, Mike received clarification from squadron. Aerial reconnaissance had detected large-scale Iraqi movements to the east, possibly a repositioning of forces or the beginning of a withdrawal. 7 Corps wanted to maintain contact and prevent the Republican Guard from escaping. By 1800 hours, Eagle Troop was again advancing eastward. The sandstorm had evolved into a full-blown shamal, a northwesterly wind carrying so much sand that visibility was reduced to less than 200 meters at times. The conditions were atrocious for military operations, yet they pressed on, relying on their thermal sights to navigate and maintain formation. Around 1930 hours, they reached phase line Grape without significant contact. Another halt was ordered while commanders assessed the situation. Mike used the opportunity to check on his platoons and ensure all vehicles remained operational despite the harsh conditions. As he returned to his tank, a new transmission crackled over the radio. "All Ghost elements. This is Ghost 6. Prepare to advance to phase line smash. I say again, prepare to advance to phase line smash. Acknowledge." Phase line smash was another 10 kilometers east, beyond their expected limit of advance for the day. Mike acknowledged the order and updated his platoon leaders. "We're continuing east," he informed them over the radio. "Weather is still deteriorating. Maintain tight tactical control." Eagle Troop resumed movement at 2000 hours, pushing deeper into Iraqi territory. The sandstorm had begun to abate somewhat, but visibility remained poor. Their advance continued cautiously, with 1st Platoon scouts probing ahead to identify any obstacles or enemy positions. At 21:10 hours, as they approached a barely perceptible rise in the terrain, the first report of enemy contact came over the radio. Eagle 6, this is Red 1, Lieutenant Gautier's voice crackled. Contact front. Enemy vehicles approximately 1 kilometer. Mike immediately ordered the troop to take up battle positions along the slight ridge. 1st Platoon's Bradleys deployed in firing positions, while the tank platoons moved up to support. Through his thermal sight, Mike could see the heat signatures of several armored vehicles in the distance. Red 1, Eagle 6, can you identify vehicle types? A brief pause. Affirm, appear to be T-72s and BMPs. Estimate a company size element. This was it, their first contact with the Republican Guard. Mike issued a contact report to Squadron, then assessed his options. Their orders were to find and fix enemy forces, not to become decisively engaged. But allowing this Iraqi force to withdraw would mean losing a valuable intelligence opportunity. Red 1, Eagle 6, engage with TOW at extreme range, target lead vehicle only. Roger, tow away. Through his thermal sight, Mike watched as the missile streaked toward the lead Iraqi tank. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The T-72's ammunition detonated in a massive explosion that lit up the night sky. The turret was blown completely off the hull, arcing through the air before crashing to the desert floor. The effect on the Iraqi formation was electric. Vehicles began moving rapidly, some advancing, others attempting to take up firing positions. They had clearly been caught by surprise. All Eagle elements. This is Eagle 6. Enemy company, direct front. Engage targets of opportunity. Bradleys hold position and provide suppressive fire. Tanks prepare to maneuver. As his order went out, Mike heard Lieutenant Colonel Wallace on the squadron net. Eagle 6, Ghost 6, what's your situation? Ghost 6, we have engaged a company of T-72s and BMPs at Grid 73 Easting. Enemy appears to be part of a larger formation. Request permission to conduct limited attack to develop the situation. A brief pause. Eagle 6, permission granted. Do not advance beyond phase line smash. Mike acknowledged and turned his attention back to the developing battle. 1st Platoon's Bradleys were now engaging the enemy vehicles with their 25mm chain guns, creating a web of tracer fire in the darkness. The Iraqi return fire was sporadic and inaccurate, suggesting they were still struggling to organize a coherent defense. White 1, Green 1, this is Eagle 6. Prepare to advance on my command. Echelon right, focusing fire on the enemy's left flank. The tank platoon leaders acknowledged. Mike took a final survey of the battlefield through his thermal sight. The enemy company appeared to be the advance guard of a much larger formation. Heat signatures of additional vehicles could be seen further east, though details were difficult to discern at that range. It was time to seize the initiative. All Eagle tanks, advance! Mike's driver, Private Henskog, pushed the throttle forward, and the massive Abrams lurched into motion. The 9 tanks of Eagle Troop moved forward in perfect coordination, maintaining their intervals despite the limited visibility. As they crested the small rise, the full scope of the enemy position became apparent. What had appeared to be a company was actually the forward element of a much larger unit, possibly a battalion or more. Dozens of heat signatures dotted the thermal displays, representing a formidable armored force. In that moment, Captain Michael Harrington made the decision that would define his military career. Rather than halt at the realization they were outnumbered, he issued a new order. All Eagle elements, enemy battalion front. Tanks, continue advance. Bradleys, displace forward to supporting positions. The counterintuitive order, advancing against superior numbers, was based on a principle Mike had studied extensively. In armored warfare, the side that seizes and maintains the initiative often prevails regardless of numerical disadvantages. By pressing the attack now, while the Iraqis were still disorganized, they could achieve a decisive effect before the enemy could bring their superior numbers to bear. As his tank rolled forward, Mike keyed his radio again. Ghost 6, Eagle 6, enemy forces battalion strength, possibly larger. We are engaging. Wallace's response was immediate. Eagle 6, do not, I say again, do not become decisively engaged. Find their positions and withdraw to phase line smash. Mike hesitated. Direct disobedience of an order was not something he took lightly, but the tactical situation was developing rapidly. If they withdrew now, they would lose the advantage of surprise and initiative. The enemy would have time to organize a coordinated defense, or worse, counterattack against an exposed withdrawal. Ghost 6, Eagle 6, We are already in contact, continuing to develop the situation. A diplomatic response that neither explicitly acknowledged nor rejected the order. Mike switched to the troop frequency. All Eagle elements, press the attack. Maximum rate of fire, short halts to engage. The next minutes unfolded in a blur of activity. Eagle troops tanks advancing at 25 miles per hour across the desert floor, engaged target after target. The superior fire control systems of the Abrams allowed them to fire accurately while moving, a capability the Iraqi T-72s lacked. The 120mm main guns of the American tanks found their marks with devastating effect, while the return fire from the Iraqis was largely ineffective. Eagle 6, driver, we're entering a minefield. Henskog's voice cut through the radio chatter. Looking down, Mike could see the telltale signs of surface-laid mines scattered across their path. All Eagle tanks, we are in a minefield. Drive through, I repeat, drive through. Bradley's following tank tracks. The decision to push through rather than attempt to breach or bypass the obstacle was another calculated risk. The Abrams, with its heavy armor and reinforced tracks, could withstand most Iraqi anti-tank mines. The momentum of their attack was too valuable to sacrifice for caution. As they penetrated deeper into the Iraqi position, the true scale of the enemy force became apparent. What they had engaged was not merely a battalion, but elements of an entire brigade of the Tawakalna Division. T-72 tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, artillery pieces, and support vehicles stretched across a front nearly 2 kilometers wide. Yet despite the disparity in numbers, Eagle Troop held the advantage. Their night vision capabilities were far superior, allowing them to identify and engage targets while the Iraqis struggled to locate them. Their fire control systems enabled accurate shooting on the move, while the Iraqis had to halt to achieve any accuracy. And most significantly, the psychological impact of their bold advance had thrown the Iraqi command structure into confusion. The radio crackled with Lieutenant Colonel Wallace's voice again. Eagle 6, Ghost 6, you are at your limit of advance. Hold position. Mike glanced at his GPS. They had indeed reached phase line smash, the boundary they were not supposed to cross. But the momentum of their attack was devastating the enemy formation. To halt now would surrender the initiative just as they were achieving decisive effects. Ghost 6, Eagle 6, Mike replied. Cannot stop. We are decisively engaged with enemy forces, continuing attack to complete destruction of enemy elements in our sector. It was a career-risking decision, explicitly disregarding an order from his direct commander. But Mike's calculus was clear. The tactical opportunity to destroy a significant enemy formation outweighed the risk of disciplinary action. For the next 20 minutes, Eagle Troop continued its advance, systematically destroying Iraqi vehicles as they encountered them. The coordination between the tank and Bradley platoons was flawless, a testament to the countless hours of training they had conducted. The tanks provided the heavy hitting power, while the Bradleys secured the flanks and engaged lighter vehicles. The Iraqi resistance, initially disorganized, began to stiffen. Several T-72s managed to form a hasty defensive line and opened fire as Eagle Troop approached. Their rounds fell short or went wide, but the increasing accuracy indicated they were adapting to the situation. All Eagle elements, be advised enemy, is forming defensive position at our 12 o'clock, Mike warned. Tank platoons, focus fire on identified T-72s. Bradleys, suppress BMPs, and infantry. The intensifying enemy fire did little to slow their advance. The superior armor of the Abrams shrugged off the few hits they received, while their return fire continued to devastate the Iraqi vehicles. As they pushed deeper into the enemy formation, they began encountering support elements, command vehicles, ammunition carriers, fuel trucks. These soft targets erupted in spectacular secondary explosions when hit, illuminating the battlefield with bright flashes visible even through the swirling sand. By 22:30 hours, Eagle Troop had advanced nearly 5 kilometers beyond phase line smash. The Iraqi formation they had engaged was in complete disarray, with surviving vehicles fleeing eastward in small groups. All Eagle elements, halt advance, Mike ordered. Consolidate current positions. Conduct ammunition check and casualty assessment. The reports from his platoon leaders were almost unbelievable. Despite engaging a force that outnumbered them at least 5-1, Eagle Troop had suffered no casualties and only minor damage to 2 Bradley fighting vehicles. In contrast, they had destroyed over 60 Iraqi vehicles, tanks, BMPs, artillery pieces, and support vehicles. As they secured their positions, the first elements of the follow-on forces began to arrive. Tanks from Iron Troop, part of Ghost Squadron's second echelon, moved up to reinforce their position. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace arrived in his command vehicle, his expression a mixture of anger and amazement. "Harrington, that was the most reckless, insubordinate, and brilliant piece of tactical execution I've ever witnessed," he said when Mike reported to him. "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir, I did," Mike replied, standing at attention beside Wallace's vehicle. "You also just destroyed the better part of a Republican Guard battalion with 0 casualties." Wallace shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know whether to court-martial you or recommend you for the Silver Star." "I'll accept either outcome, sir. The tactical situation demanded aggressive action. I made the decision I felt was necessary to accomplish our mission with minimal risk to my troops." Wallace studied him for a long moment. "Your after-action report better be the most detailed, comprehensive document I've ever read. Every engagement, every decision point, every round expended. I want it all." "Yes, sir." "Now get your troop ready to continue operations. This fight isn't over yet." As Wallace departed, Mike returned to his tank. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the engagement was beginning to ebb, leaving him aware of just how close they had come to disaster. A slightly different set of circumstances, better Iraqi gunnery, a different array of enemy forces, a mechanical failure at a critical moment, and the outcome could have been catastrophically different. Yet they had prevailed. Through superior training, equipment, and tactical execution, Eagle Troop had achieved one of the most lopsided victories in modern armored warfare. What would later be known as the Battle of 73 Easting, named for the north-south grid line where the initial contact occurred, would be studied in war colleges for decades to come. For now, though, there was still work to be done. The enemy was retreating but not destroyed. Coalition forces were continuing their advance across southern Iraq, driving toward Kuwait City to liberate it from Iraqi occupation. Mike gathered his platoon leaders for a brief conference. "Outstanding execution today," he told them, "but this operation isn't over. We need to consolidate, rearm, and prepare to continue the advance tomorrow." Lieutenant Gautier spoke up. "Sir, the men are wondering, how many did we actually get?" Mike consulted his notes. "Preliminary count shows 43 T-72s, 28 BMPs, various artillery pieces, and support vehicles. Total destruction estimated at 1 reinforced battalion." The platoon leaders exchanged glances, the magnitude of their achievement sinking in. "How did we do it?" Rodriguez asked. "They outnumbered us at least 5-1. "We had every advantage except numbers," Mike replied. "Better equipment, better training, better tactics. But most importantly, you and your men performed exactly as we trained. The countless hours at gunnery, the endless battle drills, the maintenance discipline, it all paid off today." He looked at each of them in turn. "Get some rest while you can. Check your men and your vehicles. We move again at first light." As the platoon leaders departed, Mike took a moment to absorb the events of the day. They had engaged and defeated elements of the Tawakalna Division, Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard. They had done so while outnumbered and operating beyond their planned limit of advance, and they had done it without losing a single American soldier. Later that night, after ensuring his troop was properly positioned and all maintenance issues addressed, Mike finally had a moment to process his own emotions about the battle. Sitting alone in the commander's position of his tank, he opened his small notebook and began to write. February 26, 1991. Today, Eagle Troop engaged elements of the Republican Guard in what may be the most lopsided armored victory since World War II. The men performed magnificently, executing everything we trained for with precision and courage. I made the decision to continue the attack beyond our limit of advance, a decision that may have consequences for my career but was tactically necessary in the moment. Whatever happens, I am immensely proud of what this troop accomplished today. The next morning, as promised, Mike had his platoon leaders gather their men and record their personal accounts of the battle. These first-hand narratives would prove invaluable for future training and historical documentation. They also revealed something profound about the nature of combat, how differently each participant experienced the same events. Sergeant Lawrence, one of 1st Platoon's Bradley commanders, described the strange calm he felt once the shooting started. All the training just took over. "It wasn't even like I was thinking about what to do next. My body just knew." Specialist Rodriguez, a loader on one of the tanks, spoke about time seeming to slow down during the most intense moments. "I could see the rounds coming out of the gun tube, like they were moving in slow motion. Everything was crystal clear. And Sergeant First Class Thompson, a platoon sergeant with years of training, but his first taste of actual combat, expressed something many felt. It seemed almost too easy. That sounds arrogant, but it's not meant to be. We trained so hard for so long that when the real thing happened, it was almost like another exercise. Except, of course, it wasn't. As Mike collected these accounts, he reflected on his own experience. The clarity of thought he'd maintained throughout the engagement, the instinctive decision-making that had guided their actions, the absolute focus on the mission to the exclusion of fear or doubt. These were the products of years of preparation, both mental and physical. Later that day, Eagle Troop received new orders. They were to continue eastward, maintaining pressure on the retreating Iraqi forces. The ground war was proceeding faster than planners had anticipated, with coalition forces advancing rapidly across southern Iraq and into Kuwait. Before they moved out, Mike took a final walk through the battlefield. The desert was littered with the burnt-out hulks of Iraqi vehicles, some still smoldering despite the night's passing. The scale of destruction was sobering. Each vehicle had contained men, most of whom had not survived the engagement. As he surveyed the scene, Mike noticed a small group of his soldiers gathered around an Iraqi T-72 that had been hit but not completely destroyed. Approaching, he found them examining personal items recovered from the tank: photographs, letters, a watch, a wallet containing Kuwaiti currency. "What are you doing with those?" Mike asked. One of the soldiers, a young specialist, looked up. "Just looking, sir," trying to understand who these guys were. Mike nodded. "Gather those items and secure them. When we process prisoners later, we'll return them." The soldiers looked surprised. "Return them, sir? They're enemy soldiers." "They're human beings," Mike replied quietly. "They had families, lives before this war. Those things belonged to them or their families, not to us as souvenirs." It was a small moment, but one that reflected the values Mike had tried to instill in his troop. Even in victory, especially in victory, maintaining their humanity and ethical standards was paramount. As they prepared to resume the advance, Mike received word that a group of Iraqi officers had been captured, including a battalion commander from the Tawakalna division. With Colonel Reynolds' permission, he arranged to speak with the Iraqi officer. The meeting took place in a makeshift detention area where prisoners were being processed before transfer to rear areas. The Iraqi lieutenant colonel, still wearing his dusty uniform, minus insignia and sidearm, stood as Mike entered the tent. Through a translator, Mike introduced himself. "I'm Captain Harrington, commander of the American unit you faced yesterday." The Iraqi officer nodded stiffly. "Lieutenant Colonel Faisal al-Dulaimi, 18th Battalion, Tawakalna Division." "Your men fought bravely," Mike said, offering the professional courtesy one soldier extends to another. Al-Dulaimi's expression revealed surprise at this acknowledgement. "Not bravely enough, it seems." "You were at a significant disadvantage," Mike replied. "Our night vision capabilities, fire control systems, and armor protection exceeded yours considerably." The Iraqi officer seemed to appreciate the technical assessment rather than platitudes. "We were told American tanks could be defeated by our T-72s, that your armor was vulnerable to our 125mm guns. Your information was incorrect." "Clearly." Al-Dulaimi hesitated, then asked, "How many vehicles did you lose?" "None," Mike answered honestly. "We had minor damage to 2 Bradley fighting vehicles. No fatalities or serious injuries." The Iraqi's face registered shock. "And how many of our vehicles did you destroy?" "Preliminary count suggests approximately 70 of various types." Al-Dulaimi was silent for a long moment. "We never saw you clearly," he finally said. "We heard your tanks, occasionally glimpsed shapes in the darkness. But our thermal sights are inferior to yours. It was like fighting ghosts." The conversation continued briefly, touching on tactical details of the engagement. Mike learned that the Iraqi force had been in defensive positions, expecting any attack to come the following day. They had been completely unprepared for a night attack through a sandstorm. As Mike prepared to leave, Al-Dulaimi asked one final question. "What will happen to my men now?" "They'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention," Mike assured him. "Medical care for the wounded, food, shelter, and eventual repatriation after hostilities end." The Iraqi officer nodded. "Better than we expected. We were told Americans tortured prisoners." "That's not how we fight," Mike replied firmly. "That's not who we are." The encounter left Mike with much to reflect on as Eagle Troop resumed their advance. The nature of warfare, its terrible efficiency when technological advantages aligned with superior training and tactics, was starkly demonstrated by their experience. Yet equally important was how one conducted oneself in victory. The treatment of prisoners, the respect for human dignity even amid the destruction of combat, these define the character of a military force as much as its battlefield prowess. Over the next several days, Eagle Troop continued operations as part of the coalition's advance. The pace of the Iraqi collapse accelerated, with entire units surrendering en masse. On February 28th, just 100 hours after the ground offensive began, President Bush declared a ceasefire. Kuwait had been liberated, the Iraqi military decimated. For the men of Eagle Troop, the abrupt end to hostilities brought mixed emotions. Relief that they had survived relatively unscathed, pride in their achievements, but also questions about whether the job had been completed. Saddam Hussein remained in power in Baghdad, his Republican Guard not entirely destroyed. During the ceasefire, Mike gathered his troop for a final address before they began preparation for redeployment. "What you accomplished here will be remembered for generations," he told them. "You faced the elite of Iraq's military and defeated them decisively. You did so through professionalism, discipline, and courage." He paused, looking at the faces of men who had entered combat as soldiers and emerged as veterans. "Some may question whether we should have continued to Baghdad, whether we've left the job unfinished. Those are political decisions beyond our control. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that you completed the mission assigned to you with extraordinary skill and honor." In the months that followed, as Eagle Troop returned to Germany and began the process of reintegrating into peacetime operations, the significance of what they had achieved at 73 Easting became increasingly apparent. Military historians and analysts studied the engagement, identifying it as perhaps the most one-sided victory in modern armored warfare. For Captain Michael "Iron Mike" Harrington, the battle brought both recognition and scrutiny. His decision to continue the attack beyond the limit of advance was both praised as tactically brilliant and questioned as insubordinate. Ultimately, the results spoke for themselves, a decisive victory without American casualties. He received the Silver Star for his actions, along with a reputation as an aggressive, effective combat leader. Yet as he reflected on the experience, Mike found himself less concerned with personal accolades than with the broader lessons of the conflict. The integration of technology, training, and tactics had created an overwhelming advantage on the battlefield. But technology alone was insufficient. It was the human element, the quality and preparation of the soldiers employing that technology, that made the difference. This understanding would guide him in the years ahead as his career advanced. The principles that had served Eagle Troop so well at 73 Easting, rigorous training, attention to maintenance and logistics, clear communication, and ethical conduct even amid the chaos of combat, would become the foundation of his leadership philosophy. And when 14 years later he found himself facing a very different kind of conflict in Iraq, these principles would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Iraq, 2005. The Chinook helicopter banked sharply as it approached the forward operating base outside Tal Afar, its rotors churning the desert air into swirling clouds of fine sand. Colonel Michael Harrington sat strapped in, along with his staff, reviewing mental notes for the upcoming briefing. 14 years had passed since Desert Storm, and both he and this country had changed profoundly. The helicopter touched down with a jolt that resonated through its metal frame. As the rear ramp descended, Mike stepped into the harsh Iraqi sunlight. A small delegation waited on the landing zone, officers from the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, the unit he would now command. Among them stood a familiar face. "Welcome to Tal Afar, sir," Lieutenant Colonel Timothy Gautier said, saluting crisply. Mike returned the salute with a smile, recognizing his former platoon leader from Eagle Troop. "Tim, good to see you. Been a while since 73 Easting." "Yes, sir. Different war now." Those 3 words encapsulated the enormous shift in warfare they faced. In '91, they had fought a conventional enemy in open desert, tank on tank, with clear objectives and identifiable adversaries. Now they confronted an insurgency, an enemy that melted into the civilian population, struck without warning, and recognized no rules of engagement. As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, Gautier briefed him on the current situation. Tal Afar's become a hub for al-Qaeda in Iraq. They've essentially taken over the city, established training facilities, command centers, and they're calling it their new caliphate. Population: about 200,000 mixed Sunni and Shia, the sectarian divides being exploited by al-Qaeda. They've driven out most of the Shia, terrorized the rest into compliance. Mike nodded grimly. What about previous operations here? There was an attempt to clear the city last year, Operation Black Typhoon. Limited success, cleared some neighborhoods. But as soon as our forces withdrew, the insurgents came right back. At the regimental headquarters, Mike was introduced to his principal staff and received a comprehensive intelligence briefing. The picture that emerged was sobering. Talifar had become what some were calling the Fort Benning of the insurgency, a training ground where terrorists learned everything from IED construction to ambush tactics to kidnapping techniques. From here, foreign fighters and weapons flowed into other parts of Iraq, fueling the growing violence across the country. After the briefing, Mike retired to his quarters to process what he'd learned and begin formulating a strategy. The challenges were immense. Unlike the clear-cut objectives of Desert Storm, defeating this enemy required a much more nuanced approach, one that combined military force with political sensitivity, cultural awareness, and nation-building efforts. That evening, he called his key commanders together for an initial planning session. Gentlemen, we face a fundamentally different conflict than what many of us experienced in '91, he began. Back then, we knew exactly who the enemy was and where to find them. We had technological overmatch in almost every category. This fight is different. He moved to a map of Talifar displayed on the wall. The enemy doesn't wear uniforms. They don't mass forces. They hide among civilians. And they're fighting for something beyond territory. They're fighting for hearts and minds, for the future of this country. Lieutenant Colonel Gautier spoke up. Sir, with respect, we've been trying the hearts and minds approach. Meanwhile, they're planting IEDs, assassinating local leaders who cooperate with us, and terrorizing the population. Mike nodded. I'm not suggesting we abandon force, Tim, far from it, but we need to be more strategic about how we apply it. He outlined his initial concept. First, they would conduct extensive reconnaissance operations along the infiltration routes from Syria, gathering intelligence on the flow of fighters and materials. Second, they would isolate Talifar by constructing a berm around the entire city, limiting access to a few controlled entry points. Third, they would evacuate civilians before launching any major clearing operation. This won't be another Black Typhoon, Mike concluded. We're not going to clear neighborhoods only to abandon them. When we go in, we stay in. We establish security, restore essential services, help stand up local governance. We don't leave until the Iraqis can hold it themselves. The plan represented a significant departure from previous approaches. It acknowledged that military force alone couldn't solve the complex challenges of counterinsurgency. Success would require patience, persistence, and a comprehensive strategy that addressed the political and social dimensions of the conflict. Over the next several weeks, Mike immersed himself in understanding the environment. He met with tribal leaders, local officials, and Iraqi military commanders. He studied the city's history, its sectarian dynamics, and the grievances that al-Qaeda exploited. He walked the markets, heavily guarded, visited schools, and observed Friday prayers at mosques. What he discovered was a community fractured by fear and mistrust. The Sunni population feared retribution from Shia militias. The Shia feared al-Qaeda's brutality. Everyone feared being caught between American firepower and insurgent violence. We need to break this cycle of fear, Mike told his staff. As long as people are afraid, they won't cooperate. They won't provide intelligence. They won't believe in the possibility of a stable future. The reconnaissance operations along the Syrian border yielded valuable intelligence. Using unmanned aerial vehicles, ground patrols, and human sources, they mapped the infiltration routes and identified safe houses used by foreign fighters entering Iraq. Targeted raids captured several key facilitators and yielded documents revealing the structure of al-Qaeda's operation in Talifar. Meanwhile, the massive engineering effort to encircle the city with a berm made progress. Army engineers and Iraqi contractors worked around the clock, using bulldozers to create a 12-foot earthen wall spanning nearly 30 kilometers. The berm would have only 3 controlled access points, allowing the regiment to screen everyone entering or leaving the city. As these preparations continued, Mike focused on building relationships with key Iraqi partners. Most important among these was Colonel Ahmed Najim, the commander of the Iraqi Army's 3rd Division. A former officer in Saddam's military, Najim had embraced the new Iraqi army with a genuine commitment to serving all Iraqis, regardless of sect or ethnicity. Your plan is good, Colonel Harrington, Najim said during one of their strategy sessions. But my concern is the aftermath. Americans are good at breaking things. Are you equally committed to rebuilding? That's a fair question, Mike acknowledged. I can't guarantee what decisions will be made at levels above me, but I can promise you this. My regiment will not clear and abandon. We'll stay until your forces are ready to take over. The relationship between the two commanders grew into mutual respect. Najim provided insights into Iraqi culture and politics that no intelligence briefing could convey. Mike, in turn, shared his experiences from Desert Storm and his approach to leadership. Another crucial partnership developed with Mayor Najim al-Jabouri, a former Iraqi Air Force officer who had accepted the dangerous position of leading Tal Afar's civilian government. The mayor had survived multiple assassination attempts and continued to advocate for his city despite the risks. My people need to see that cooperation with the Americans brings benefits, the mayor explained. Schools, electricity, water, jobs, these matter more than military operations to most families. Mike took this message to heart, integrating civil affairs projects into the overall campaign plan. Each military action would be paired with specific reconstruction efforts to demonstrate immediate benefits to the local population. By late July, the preparations were nearly complete. The berm around Tal Afar was finished, creating a physical barrier that channeled all movement through the controlled checkpoints. Reconnaissance had identified the main al-Qaeda strongholds within the city, particularly in the Sarai district, an ancient neighborhood of densely packed buildings and narrow alleyways that provided perfect defensive terrain for the insurgents. The final piece of the plan involved the evacuation of civilians from combat areas. This proved to be one of the most challenging aspects. Many residents feared leaving their homes and possessions, believing they would be looted in their absence. Others, intimidated by al-Qaeda, refused to comply with evacuation orders. Mike worked with tribal leaders, religious figures, and the mayor to communicate the necessity of the evacuation. They promised security for abandoned neighborhoods, compensation for damaged property, and humanitarian assistance at temporary camps established outside the city. As the evacuation progressed, an incident occurred that tested Mike's commitment to his principles. At one of the checkpoints, Iraqi soldiers detained a family attempting to leave the city. The father, a middle-aged man with no identification, was suspected of being an al-Qaeda facilitator based on intelligence reports. The Iraqi officers wanted to detain him for extended questioning. His family, wife, and 3 young children would be sent to the displacement camp alone. The man protested his innocence, claiming he was merely a shopkeeper who had lost his documents during a previous raid. When Mike arrived at the checkpoint to assess the situation, he found the family huddled together, fear evident in their eyes. The father maintained a dignity despite his circumstances, meeting Mike's gaze directly. "What makes you suspect him?" Mike asked the Iraqi captain in charge. "We have reports of a facilitator matching his description, same age, build, from the same neighborhood, and he cannot prove his identity." Mike considered the situation. The intelligence was vague. It could apply to dozens of men in Tal Afar, yet security demanded caution. "Process him according to procedure," Mike finally directed. "Photograph, fingerprints, initial questioning. If there's no specific evidence linking him to insurgent activity, release him to join his family at the camp by nightfall." The Iraqi captain seemed surprised. "But sir, we normally hold suspects for 3 days minimum. Is there specific evidence against this man beyond a general description?" "No, but..." "Then process him expeditiously. Document everything. If he's innocent, reunite him with his family today. If evidence emerges later, we can find him at the camp." As Mike walked away, Colonel Najim fell in beside him. "That was unexpected," the Iraqi officer commented. "Many American commanders would defer to our procedures." Mike shook his head. "If he's innocent, separating him from his family creates one more family that hates us. If he's guilty, we've documented him and know where to find him. Either way, treating him with dignity serves our purpose better than arbitrary detention." By early August, the majority of civilians had been evacuated from the areas designated for clearing operations. Intelligence estimated that approximately 500 al-Qaeda fighters remained in the city, concentrated primarily in the Sarai district and several other strongholds. They had prepared extensive defenses, including buildings rigged with explosives, sniper positions, and hundreds of IEDs placed throughout likely approach routes. The final planning for Operation Restoring Rights was underway when Mike received word that General John Casey, the overall commander of coalition forces in Iraq, wanted to visit Tal Afar to review the operation personally. The general's arrival created a flurry of activity. Staff officers prepared detailed briefings, units conducted rehearsals, and the base received an impromptu beautification effort. When Casey arrived, Mike led him through a comprehensive overview of the situation and the planned operation. "You're taking a different approach than previous operations," Casey observed. "More emphasis on hold and build phases, less on the initial clearing." "Yes, sir," Mike confirmed. "We've studied the lessons from previous operations. Clearing alone doesn't produce lasting results. We need to remain until Iraqi forces can maintain security independently." "Resources?" "Adequate for the clearing phase, sir. I'm more concerned about the holding phase. We've requested additional infantry to secure neighborhoods once cleared." Casey nodded thoughtfully. "The entire country is competing for resources, Colonel. Everyone wants more infantry." The inspection continued with visits to several key positions and meetings with Iraqi counterparts. Throughout, Casey seemed impressed with the level of preparation and the integration of Iraqi forces into the plan. As they returned to the helicopter landing zone, Casey made an unexpected comment. "You know, Harrington, I think you need more infantry for this operation." Mike glanced at his division commander, who rode with them in the SUV, but had remained silent on this topic despite Mike's repeated requests over the previous months. "I've been saying that for some time, sir," Mike replied carefully. Casey looked pointedly at the division commander. "Make it happen. The 325 Airborne is available. Divert them to support this operation." "Yes, sir," the division commander replied, his expression neutral. After Casey's departure, Mike received a cool reception from his superior. The public override of the division's resource allocation had created friction, but Mike's focus remained on the upcoming operation, not on career politics. The arrival of the 2nd Battalion, 325th Airborne Infantry Regiment, 2 days later, transformed the operational possibilities. Commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Chris Gibson, an experienced combat leader, the battalion brought over 600 additional soldiers specialized in urban operations, exactly what was needed for clearing the dense urban terrain of the Sarai district. "We're ready to get into the fight," Gibson told Mike during their initial meeting. "Just point us in the right direction." "You'll get your fight," Mike assured him. "But I need disciplined aggression, not just aggression. We're trying to liberate this city, not destroy it." The integration of the airborne infantry into the plan allowed for a more simultaneous approach, rather than the sequential clearing originally envisioned. This would create more pressure on the enemy, denying them the ability to shift forces to meet each thrust individually. As the final preparations concluded, Mike gathered the key leaders, American and Iraqi, for one last review. "This operation isn't just about clearing insurgents," he reminded them. "It's about restoring rights to the people of Talafar, their right to security, to basic services, to a life without fear. Every action we take should support that goal." He looked each of them in the eye. "Questions?" There were none. The plan was sound. The forces prepared. All that remained was execution. On September 2, 2005, Operation Restoring Rights began. The initial phase involved isolation, tightening the cordon around Talafar to prevent both reinforcement and escape. Special operations forces conducted targeted raids against known al-Qaeda leaders, capturing some and disrupting the enemy's command structure. The main assault commenced on September 3rd with a multi-pronged advance into the city. The 3rd ACR squadrons, each partnered with Iraqi Army battalions, pushed in from different directions, systematically clearing neighborhoods before establishing permanent positions. Mike established his tactical command post in the Ottoman-era castle that overlooked the city, providing both a physical vantage point and a symbolic position of authority. From there, he could observe much of the battlefield while maintaining communications with all elements. The 325 Airborne, supported by elements of the regiment's tanks and Bradleys, took on the most challenging objective, the Sarai district, with its maze of ancient buildings and narrow streets. The fighting there was intense from the beginning, with insurgents using prepared positions and the complex terrain to maximum advantage. The combined use of air and ground assets proved decisive. Mike had arranged for extensive air support, Apache helicopters, Air Force F-16s, and the regiment's own reconnaissance helicopters. These platforms provided real-time intelligence and precision strike capabilities that helped overcome the insurgents' defensive advantages. One key innovation came in the use of communications intelligence. Working with specialist units, Mike implemented a plan to temporarily disable the insurgents' cell phone and radio networks, then selectively reactivate them to monitor enemy communications. "They're gathering in the alleyway behind the Blue Mosque," reported the intelligence officer, monitoring intercepted calls. "At least 20 fighters trying to reorganize." Mike immediately directed an Apache team to the location. Watching through the video feed, he saw the insurgents clustered in the confined space, seemingly unaware they were being observed. The Apaches engaged with 30mm cannon fire, neutralizing the gathering in seconds. "Reactivate their comms on the eastern sector," Mike ordered. "Let's see where they're trying to regroup next." This cycle repeated throughout the day, intercepting communications, identifying gatherings, neutralizing them, then shifting to another sector. The psychological impact on the insurgents was devastating. Their inability to communicate securely created confusion and panic. One intercepted message was particularly revealing. "We are being slaughtered. They know our every move. Allah have mercy on us." By the evening of the first day, the operation was proceeding ahead of schedule. The regiment's squadrons had secured approximately 30% of the city, establishing patrol bases in cleared areas to prevent insurgents from returning. The most difficult fighting continued in the Sarai district, where Lieutenant Colonel Gibson's paratroopers encountered stiff resistance. Buildings had been fortified, alleyways booby-trapped, and snipers positioned on rooftops. Progress was measured in blocks, sometimes individual buildings. Mike visited their position as night fell, picking his way through rubble-strewn streets to Gibson's command post in a partially collapsed school building. "How's it going?" he asked, crouching beside the airborne commander. Gibson wiped sweat and dust from his face. "Tough fighting, but we're moving. These bastards prepared well. Every approach is covered by fire, every building potentially rigged to explode." "Casualties?" "3 wounded, none critical. Considering the intensity, we've been lucky." Mike nodded. "Need anything?" "More engineers to clear IEDs would help. We're moving slower than I'd like because we have to check every doorway, every pile of trash." "I'll send you Bravo Company from our engineer battalion at first light." As Mike prepared to leave, Gibson added, "One more thing, sir. We captured some interesting intelligence, a map showing what appears to be their fallback positions. Looks like they're planning to concentrate in the central market area if we push them out of here." This intelligence proved invaluable. Mike adjusted the plan, positioning forces to block the insurgents' planned withdrawal routes and preparing artillery to target their rally points. Throughout the night, the pressure continued. While main force units consolidated their positions, special operations teams conducted targeted raids against identified leadership targets. The regiment's reconnaissance helicopters, equipped with infrared cameras, spotted insurgents attempting to move under cover of darkness and directed precision strikes against them. By morning, it was clear that the al-Qaeda defense was fracturing. Intercepts indicated leaders trying desperately to rally their fighters, but coordination had broken down. Some groups fought tenaciously in isolated pockets, while others attempted to flee or hide among remaining civilians. The second day saw accelerated progress as the regiment exploited the enemy's disorganization. The airborne battalion pushed deeper into Sarai, clearing block after block. The regiment's cavalry squadrons secured the remaining neighborhoods, establishing patrol bases and beginning the transition to the hold phase of the operation. By the evening of September 4th, organized resistance had largely collapsed. Sporadic fighting continued, particularly in the Sarai district, but the enemy no longer controlled any significant portion of Talafar. Mike gathered his commanders for an assessment. "We've broken their military capability," he concluded, "but this isn't over. Now comes the harder part, holding what we've taken and beginning reconstruction." The transition to the hold phase began immediately. Each cleared neighborhood received a combined U.S.-Iraqi security force to maintain order and prevent insurgents from returning. Civil affairs teams assessed damage and identified immediate humanitarian needs. Combat engineers cleared IEDs and booby traps to make areas safe for returning civilians. The most visible symbol of the change came when Mayor Najim al-Jabouri returned to the city hall, escorted by both American and Iraqi soldiers. He raised the Iraqi flag over the building in a ceremony attended by tribal leaders, religious figures, and military commanders. "Today marks the beginning of Talafar's rebirth," the mayor declared. "With the help of our American friends and the sacrifice of Iraqi soldiers, our city has been freed from terrorists. Now we must work together to rebuild." The rebuilding efforts had been carefully prepared in advance. Contractors were ready to repair damaged infrastructure. Medical teams established clinics in each major neighborhood. Food and water distribution points were set up. Schools were cleaned and prepared to reopen. Perhaps most importantly, the security presence was persistent. Unlike previous operations where clearing forces had withdrawn after the initial success, Mike ensured that each neighborhood maintained a 24-hour security presence, with joint American-Iraqi patrols visible at all times. The people need to believe we're staying this time, he explained to his officers. Only then will they risk cooperating with us. The strategy worked. As civilians began returning to cleared neighborhoods, information about remaining insurgents increased dramatically. Residents pointed out hidden weapons caches, identified al-Qaeda sympathizers, and reported suspicious activities. Each piece of intelligence led to further raids, gradually dismantling what remained of the enemy network. 3 weeks after the operation began, Mike hosted General Casey for a follow-up visit. They toured the city, now bustling with activity, as markets reopened and reconstruction progressed. Impressive transformation, Casey commented, as they walked through a marketplace that had been an insurgent stronghold a month earlier. What's your assessment of the security situation now? Fragile but improving, Mike replied honestly. We've eliminated most of the organized resistance, but individual fighters remain. The key is that the population is now actively supporting the security forces rather than the insurgents. And the Iraqi forces? Are they ready to take over? Mike chose his words carefully. They're making progress. Colonel Najim's units perform well when partnered with ours. They're not ready for independent operations in high-threat environments yet, but they're getting there. Casey nodded thoughtfully. Well, the approach here stands in stark contrast to what we've seen in other parts of Iraq. You've given us a potential model for future operations. As they returned to the command post, Casey had one final question. What's the most important lesson from this operation in your view? Mike considered this. That security is necessary, but not sufficient. People need more than just the absence of violence. They need governance, services, opportunity. And they need to believe we're committed for the long term, not just until the shooting stops. By early October, Tal Afar had transformed. Schools had reopened. Municipal services functioned. Markets teemed with activity. The police force, carefully vetted and trained, patrolled alongside coalition forces. Most significantly, sectarian tensions had decreased as Sunni and Shia residents cautiously re-engaged with one another. During this period, Mike maintained his practice of walking through different neighborhoods each day, accompanied by a small security detail and often by Iraqi officials. These walks served multiple purposes, showing visible leadership presence, gathering unfiltered information about conditions, and demonstrating confidence in the improving security situation. During one such walk through a formerly contested area, an elderly man approached him. The security detail tensed, but Mike waved them back, sensing no threat. "You are the American commander?" the man asked through an interpreter. "Yes, I am Colonel Harrington." The man studied him for a moment. "My grandson was killed by al-Qaeda last year. He refused to help them place bombs, so they executed him in the street as a warning to others." Mike expressed his condolences, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "For a long time, I hated all Americans," the man continued. "I believed you brought this violence to our country, but now I see something different. You are not just fighting, you are building. This is what Iraq needs." He extended his hand, a gesture that carried significant meaning in this cultural context. Mike shook it, recognizing the importance of the moment. "We are trying to help Iraq build its own future," Mike replied. "A future where your other grandchildren can grow up in peace." The man nodded. "Inshallah, God willing. But men must work for what God provides. We Iraqis must do our part too." Such encounters reinforced Mike's belief in the approach they were taking. Security operations continued. Targeted raids against identified insurgent cells, screening of vehicles entering the city, continuous patrolling, but increasingly the focus shifted to governance, economic development, and reconciliation between sectarian groups. One of the most significant developments came when several Sunni tribal leaders who had previously been hostile or neutral toward the coalition approached Mike and Colonel Najim with an offer to provide fighters to help secure their neighborhoods. This marked a turning point similar to what would later become known as the Awakening Movement in Anbar province. "Why now?" Mike asked the sheikh who led the delegation. "Because we have seen that you keep your word," the sheikh replied. "You did not just come to kill and leave. You stayed to build. And because al-Qaeda has shown its true face, they do not fight for Islam or for Iraq, but only for power." By December 2005, the transformation of Tal Afar had become a model for counterinsurgency operations throughout Iraq. Visitors from other units, government agencies, and international organizations came to study the approach. Mike found himself spending increasing time explaining the strategy to delegations from Baghdad and Washington. During one such visit by senior Pentagon officials, Mike emphasized the integrated nature of their success. There was no single silver bullet, he explained. It was the combination of factors: detailed intelligence preparation, physical isolation of the battlefield, civilian evacuation to minimize collateral damage, overwhelming force applied precisely, immediate transition to stability operations, and genuine partnership with Iraqi forces and local government. One official asked, "Could this approach work elsewhere in Iraq?" "Elements of it, certainly," Mike replied. "But each environment has unique characteristics. The tribal dynamics here differ from Baghdad or Fallujah. The sectarian mix varies, the terrain is different. The principles are transferable, but the specific implementation needs to be tailored." As 2005 drew to a close, Mike received orders for his next assignment. After nearly a year commanding the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, he would return to the United States to serve at the Pentagon, helping shape strategic planning for the ongoing conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Before departing, he conducted a final review with his key leaders, both American and Iraqi. "We've achieved something significant here," he told them. "Not victory in the traditional sense. This kind of conflict doesn't end with surrender ceremonies and parades. But we've created conditions for the Iraqi people to determine their own future. That's all we can realistically hope to accomplish." Colonel Najim, who had become both a colleague and a friend, spoke for the Iraqi contingent. "What you have given us is not security alone, but dignity. You treated us as partners, not subordinates. You respected our culture while helping us overcome our divisions. This approach has made all the difference." The farewell ceremony was conducted with the simple dignity of soldiers who had shared hardship and accomplished something meaningful together. The regiment assembled on the parade ground of their forward operating base, standing in formation with their Iraqi counterparts. Mike kept his remarks brief, thanking the soldiers for their service and sacrifice, acknowledging the challenges they had overcome, and expressing confidence in their continued success. What remained unspoken, but understood by all, was that they had demonstrated a new way of fighting an extraordinarily difficult type of war, a way that balanced military force with political sensitivity, cultural awareness, and nation building. As the ceremony concluded, a staff sergeant approached Mike with a small wooden box. "Sir, the troops wanted you to have this." Inside was a spent 120mm Sabo round casing from Desert Storm, mounted on a wooden base. Engraved on a brass plate were the words, "From 73 Easting to Tal Afar, 2 wars, 1 standard of excellence." The simple gesture moved him deeply. It recognized the connection between his experiences in 2 vastly different conflicts separated by 14 years, but linked by the enduring principles of leadership and the brotherhood of soldiers. Washington, D.C., 2009. The corridors of the West Wing hummed with the controlled chaos that defined the executive branch of government. Senior officials hurried between meetings, aides carried stacks of briefing papers, and the ever-present Secret Service maintained their vigilant watch. In a small office just steps from the Oval Office, Lieutenant General Michael Harrington reviewed his notes for the upcoming National Security Council meeting. As Deputy National Security Advisor, he now operated in a world far removed from the dust of Iraq or the turret of an Abrams tank. Yet the lessons learned in those environments informed his approach to the strategic challenges facing the nation. The intercom buzzed. "General, Dr. Kissinger has arrived for your meeting. Send him in, please." The door opened to admit Henry Kissinger, the legendary diplomat whose influence on American foreign policy spanned decades. At 86, he moved more slowly than in his prime, but his mind remained razor sharp. "General Harrington," Kissinger said, extending his hand, "thank you for making time." "The honor is mine, Dr. Kissinger. Please have a seat." As they settled into the comfortable chairs by the window overlooking the Rose Garden, Mike reflected on the improbable journey that had brought him to this moment. From a young boy playing with toy soldiers in Harrisburg, to a tank commander in Desert Storm, to a regimental commander in the Iraq War, and now to the innermost circles of national security decision-making. "I've read your paper on strategic patience," Kissinger began. "Your argument about the tension between political timelines and strategic requirements is quite compelling. Thank you, sir. It draws heavily on my experiences in Iraq. Yes, I can see that, but you've elevated the tactical lessons to strategic principles. That's relatively rare among military officers. The conversation ranged widely across geopolitical challenges: Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, China. Throughout, Mike found himself drawing on the lessons of his military career, translating battlefield insights into strategic considerations. As their discussion concluded, Mike mentioned a book he'd been looking for. "I've been trying to find a first edition of your White House years for my collection." "I'm flattered," Kissinger replied with a small smile. "Military men don't always appreciate diplomats. I found that military force without diplomacy is like a hammer without a craftsman, powerful but imprecise." On an impulse, Mike reached for the bookshelf behind his desk and pulled down his worn copy of Kissinger's memoir. "Actually, I've had this copy since '91. Would you mind signing it?" As he handed over the book, Kissinger opened to the first page and paused. There, in faded blue ink, was an inscription: "To Michael, may you find wisdom in these pages for your own journey of service. Love, Mom. Christmas, 1991. "Your mother gave you this?" Kissinger asked. "Yes, she was a history teacher. She passed away that year, actually." Mike glanced at the calendar on his desk. "Today is the anniversary of her death, in fact." Kissinger regarded him thoughtfully. "My mother was instrumental in our family's escape from Nazi Germany. She made decisions that saved our lives when I was just a boy. Mothers shape us in ways we often don't fully appreciate until much later." He signed the book and he paused Elizabeth Harrington's inscription, adding, "To General Harrington, C.R. Harrington, your mother's gift has found worthy purpose. With respect for your service, Henry Kissinger." The moment created an unexpected connection between the two men, not as policymakers or historical figures, but as sons shaped by the influence of remarkable mothers. As Kissinger departed, Mike reflected on the full-circle nature of the moment. His mother's gift of a book about leadership at the highest levels of government had been prophetic, though neither of them could have imagined the path that would lead from that Christmas morning to this office. His reflections were interrupted by his assistant. "Sir, the President is asking for the troop deployment options for Afghanistan before the NSC meeting." Mike nodded, returning to the present challenges. The lessons of Tal Afar remain relevant: the importance of understanding local dynamics, the limits of military force alone, the need for integrated political, economic, and security approaches. Now, however, he operated at a level where decisions affected tens of thousands of troops and millions of civilians. The stakes were higher, the consequences more far-reaching, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Leadership still meant balancing courage with caution, strength with restraint, determination with wisdom. 2 years later, as he prepared to retire after 34 years of military service, Mike found himself reflecting on that journey during an interview with a military historian documenting the Iraq War. Looking back, the historian asked, "What would you consider your most significant contribution?" Mike considered the question carefully. "I'd say it was demonstrating a different approach to counterinsurgency, one that integrated security operations with governance, services, and reconciliation. The clear hold-build approach we implemented in Tal Afar influenced doctrine and operations throughout Iraq and Afghanistan." And personally, the opportunity to lead soldiers in combat, both in Desert Storm and in Iraq, was the greatest privilege of my career. The men and women I served with represented the very best of America: courage, dedication, ingenuity, and compassion. The historian nodded. "You lost 63 soldiers during your time commanding the 3rd ACR in Iraq. How did you process those losses?" Mike's expression sobered. "You never really process them completely. Each name, each face, stays with you. Private First Class James Knott was our first casualty, a roadside bomb 2 weeks after we arrived. I still write to his parents every year on the anniversary." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I've come to understand is that leadership in combat carries a unique burden. You make decisions knowing they may cost lives, both enemy and friendly. You accept that burden because someone must, and because those you lead deserve a leader who is willing to bear it." The formal retirement ceremony was held at Fort Hood, where Mike had begun his career as a young lieutenant nearly 3.5 decades earlier. The parade ground gleamed under the Texas sun as units from the 1st Cavalry Division and the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment stood in formation to honor their departing senior leader. In the reviewing stands sat the collection of people who had shaped his journey, fellow officers, former soldiers who had served under his command, family, friends. Katie, his wife of 33 years, occupied the seat of honor, her presence a reminder of the personal support that had sustained him through deployments, separations, and the stresses of command. As the ceremony concluded, the assembled troops marched past in review, a tradition dating back centuries to allow a departing commander one final opportunity to see the soldiers under his charge. The precision of their movements, the pride evident in their bearing, served as testimony to the profession he was leaving. At the reception afterward, Katie delivered remarks that brought both laughter and poignant reflection. "When I married Mike," she said, looking at her husband with a mixture of exasperation and affection, "we were going to get out of the Army after 5 years. Thank you for the bonus 29. The laughter that rippled through the gathering acknowledged the familiar story of military families. Plans constantly adjusted, careers extended, sacrifices accumulated year after year. But through all those years, she continued, through all the moves and deployments and missed birthdays and anniversaries, there was never a moment when Mike forgot why he served. It was always about the soldiers, their welfare, their development, their success." As the evening wound down, Mike found himself in conversation with a young captain who had served under him in Iraq. "Sir, if you don't mind my asking, was it worth it? Your 34 years, the sacrifices, the time away from family, the friends we lost. Looking back, would you do it again?" The question deserved a thoughtful answer. Mike considered all that his military career had entailed, the hardships and satisfactions, the failures and achievements, the costs, both personal and professional. In a heartbeat, he finally replied, "Not because every mission was successful or every policy wise. They weren't. But because at its core, military service offers something rare in modern life. The opportunity to be part of something larger than yourself, to serve alongside men and women of extraordinary quality, united by a common purpose." He gestured to the gathering around them, officers and enlisted, active duty and retired, family members who had borne their own burdens of service. "In good Army units," Mike continued, "you experience what few civilians ever know, a sense of belonging that transcends background, politics, or personal differences. You're bound together by mutual trust, respect, and affection, by shared hardship, by a willingness to sacrifice for one another." The young captain nodded, understanding. "That's the reward of service," Mike concluded, "and it outweighs all the costs." As the reception ended and guests departed, Mike and Katie walked alone across the parade ground where the ceremony had been held. The Texas night was warm, stars visible despite the lights of the nearby barracks and headquarters buildings. "So," Katie said, slipping her arm through his, "what now, soldier?" Mike smiled at the question they'd been deferring throughout the preparation for retirement. "I'm thinking maybe we finally take that trip to Italy we've been talking about for 20 years. After that," he shrugged, "for the first time since I was 18, I don't have orders telling me where to go next." "Scary?" "A little," he admitted, "but also freeing." As they walked toward their car, Mike's thoughts drifted to the generations of soldiers who had preceded him. Men like his father who had served in Korea, the veterans of World War II who had been his mentors as a young officer, the ancient warriors whose principles of leadership remained relevant across millennia. He had entered their ranks as a young lieutenant, struggling with barracks inspections at West Point. He departed as a lieutenant general who had commanded in 2 wars and helped shape national security strategy. Throughout that journey, the constants had been the values instilled by his parents, the support of his family, and the camaraderie of fellow soldiers. Whatever came next in life, those foundations would remain. The steel in his soul, forged in peace and tempered in war, would continue to define him long after the uniform was packed away.